Hi there, welcome to my channel. I've worked in international admissions for over 10 years, and I love to take my experience working with universities, community colleges, and secondary schools to help you develop tips and strategies for submitting an application package that best represents you, but also preparing to be successful academically, socially, and for your career prospects. If any of this sounds interesting, make sure to keep watching. So today we'll be discussing English proficiency tests. What are they? Who needs them? And why are they requested? So what are they? English proficiency tests like Toefl, Ielts, PTE, which is Pearson's Test of English, DET, which is the Duolingo English Test. And then you'll also see in universities or secondary schools, sometimes community colleges as well, will accept SAT or ACT for proof of English proficiency. So when you're looking at your application, oftentimes it's requirement number 3 or 4. So number 1 is submit the application, 2 usually get us your transcripts, and 3 oftentimes is English proficiency. And then they have multiple methods and multiple ways that you can meet English proficiency requirements. So universities will usually say to make sure to submit a test in addition to your application. So that's where you submit a TOEFL, submit an IELTS, DET, PTE, SAT or ACT, something like that. Community colleges, however, might give you an option. So they might say you can submit those tests, but English proficiency scores are not required. So you're wondering, oh, does that mean they don't check for English proficiency? They will. They'll just do that when you arrive on campus. Usually, they use something called AccuPlacer, which is a test that you will take right there on their campus and will give you a score. So this gets us to who takes English proficiency tests. Generally, international students submit English proficiency tests. Typically, you'll see that written on websites as students who are non-native speakers of the English language. What does that mean? Usually for U.S. institutions, it means that you were neither born nor last educated in a country where English is the primary language of instruction. So, put that in simple person terms. It means that you were born and your last education before you started that school was not in a country where they speak, read, and write English predominantly. Now you're thinking, what are those countries where they speak English predominantly? For most institutions, that is the United States, the UK, Australia, New Zealand. Countries under the Commonwealth, right? So countries that were colonized by the British generally tend to fall under that exempt countries is what they'll call them, right? So countries where English generally is the language of instruction. Caribbean countries would generally be on that list. A few West African countries would be on that list. You'll typically see South Africa on that list as well, and some European countries. The reason why SAT or ACT scores are accepted for proof of English proficiency is that it tells the university you were last educated, at least in a school where English is the language of instruction. So usually SAT or ACT scores will be accepted for undergraduate students. Schools tend to be a little bit more lenient with the English proficiency requirements for undergraduate students. It is rare to find that sort of exemption for graduate students, however. Graduate students typically have to not only be born in a country where English is the language of instruction, but also be last educated. So in this case, it is possible to be an American citizen who did all of their schooling in India, for example, and that student is required to submit proof of English proficiency. Why are they required? What is the sole purpose of an English proficiency test? Remember I mentioned earlier that non-native speakers of English are the ones who take an English proficiency test. Simply put, an English proficiency test tells an institution what listening, reading, speaking, and writing skills you have. So it helps them understand what your capacity for language is. When you listen to something, how much of it can you understand? How much of it can you deduce? How much of it can you infer? If I were to ask you questions, critical thinking questions, based on what you've listened to, is that something you can do? Or can you only dictate? In writing, for example, do you write short sentences or do you write more complicated, longer sentences? Writing skills would matter much more for that student who's coming to the US to study managerial sciences, or who's coming to do business administration because you do a lot of reports and that sort of thing. Writing skills might not be quite as paramount for a student who is studying art and design. Writing skills are just as important, though, for that student who's studying engineering or computer science. And you're wondering, well, why is that? You'll be writing a lot of instruction manuals, a lot of user manuals, right? You write a lot of communication back and forth between yourself and the client. So writing skills will also be really important for a lot of STEM students. And that's something that international students tend to overlook or don't pay enough attention to. My advice, having worked in admissions for all these years, is don't look at English proficiency tests as a test of your intelligence. Schools that have really high English proficiency requirements, if you're looking at it and their IELTS score is a 6, 6.5 or higher, their TOEFL score is an 80 to a 90 and higher, what that should be telling you is that this is a school where I need to have really strong speaking English skills, right? Strong listening, strong reading, strong writing, and speaking skills, because the curriculum requires a lot of me. If you're doing engineering at a liberal arts college, be prepared to do a lot of writing. Right, so English proficiency tests really key you into that, and the English proficiency score keys you into that. The thing is, it's important to remember that it's not a test of intelligence. It's not a test of how smart you are. So this is not one to be particularly nervous about. It is something you need to prepare for, though. So some tips will be reading newspapers, reading magazines. So read the New York Times, right? Read things like the Newsweek magazines, right? Read research articles. Try to understand really complex language. All the English proficiency test providers have test prep resources for you that doesn't just tell you how to pass the test, but really how to develop your proficiency. IELTS is really, really great at doing that, for example. So you want to take a look at some of their complimentary resources they offer. In this current season, if you're watching this around the coronavirus period, they are offering a MOOC course. I want to say that's April 25th, something like that. When you go ahead and take the test, look at your subsections as well and see where are you lacking. If your listening skills are where you tend to be a little bit lacking, listen to TED Talks. So rather than watching TV, again, you want to listen to complex language. So watch interviews with presidents and that sort of thing. That'd be really helpful for you. If writing skills is where things tend to be a little bit weaker, give yourself a prompt. If you read something on the New York Times, or you watch something on a TED Talk, or you watch a YouTube video or something, try to, if you had to tell somebody else 3 really important things about it, what would those 3 things be? How would you communicate that information? Think about how you'd communicate that to someone who's maybe deaf, someone who maybe doesn't speak the English language as well, right? Try to think of different scenarios. These are different ways that you can help improve your vocabulary, help improve your sentence structure, and then I think just kind of your overall understanding. And when all else fails, if you're running against a deadline, or you're really concerned about English proficiency, or you just really feel that you have the capacity to be successful on their campus, always email the school and be ready and be prepared to give them proof. Show them transcript, show them the curriculum from your high school. Show them that the level of English that you have and the skills that you have prepare you enough to be successful on their campus. If you're a student who's really struggling with the cost of attendance or the cost of applying, because a lot of these tests tend to be expensive, they're in the 200s or so. If you're really having a tough time paying for it, reach out to the schools. If they have an English language program, they may be able to make some concessions for you. Oh, and one final tip, during this period, all the big providers, IELTS, TOEFL, Duolingo, PTE, everyone has an online test or an online version of their test that is significantly cheaper than the traditional in-person tests. So if you are considering applying, the IELTS, for example, is still good for 2 years. So if you're considering applying and want to save a little bit of money, now might be the time to go ahead and take your English proficiency test because they're a little bit cheaper now. So today we learned 3 things. What is an English proficiency test? It is a tool for institutions to understand your listening, reading, speaking, and writing skills. Why are they required? They are required so that the institution understands that you have enough English proficiency skills to be successful on campus. And who generally is required to submit these tests? Non-native speakers of the English language. Many institutions will have a list of countries that they consider exempt or a list of countries that they believe to be native speakers. So feel free to reach out to your school if you have questions there. So I'm very curious, what English proficiency tests have you taken? Which ones are you considering taking? And how many times have you taken them? Because I know students tend to take them more than once. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope you'll join me for the next one.